Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining in. Welcome to Creators on Brand episode 4. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and you can look in the details to see other people who've joined in. But I'm joined today by Kirstie Verdejo, sorry, who's the founder and CEO at Newsest and focusing on B2B brand and marketing strategy. We're talking a little bit today about applying brand strategy for more effective marketing. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Rami. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
So we're spending this episode talking about what brand strategy even is and how to apply it for more effective marketing. So Kirstie, I know you work with mostly B2B companies, and I'm working mostly with direct-to-consumer. So throughout the episode, I'd love to find some similarities, some differences between the two. So just to kind of start off, what's the story behind Newsest? How did that start? How did you get into all this?
Yeah, so Newsest kind of started back in February. So I can't believe we're in December now. It's been almost a year then with Newsest. So throughout my career, I've worked with some D2C, like I was telling Rami, but I've mostly been in B2B startups. So that's kind of what my target audience is for Newsest, and I've always loved the process of brand strategy and growth marketing initiatives, especially at that startup and scale up phase. So I've always known I wanted to kind of do this on my own. And then it wasn't until I got invited to apply for a head of marketing role, and then it came down to two people, and then they ended up going with the other person. So I was like, I think this is a sign to just go for it. And then they ended up being one of our first clients at Newsest, which was awesome. So that's kind of how it all started. It was like overnight, basically.
That's amazing. So like, how has your process kind of grown or changed over that time? Like on a high level, what's your brand strategy and marketing process look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really depends on who the client is and at what stage of growth they're at, and plus what their goals are. So for companies who are more bootstrapped and are really in the weeds, like say they're pre-seed, or they're just going to continue to be bootstrapped, we really focus on things like product market fit and kind of solidifying their user strategy. So I help with the kind of programs for users and what that strategy looks like, what features we should roll out, and what we should start rolling back so that we can see what type of engagement there is. And then we use a lot of that feedback for go-to-market messaging, which is really great. And that's kind of applicable across the board for all their collateral for sales when they come in, and then for content as well. But for someone who's more further along, let's say, and they have a little bit more funding or they have more product market fit, we focus on other areas like growing through content strategy and segmenting that, and making a whole omnichannel experience for the lifecycle journey of a customer.
Oh, that's awesome. So like when, in terms of finding like that product market fit initially, what is that? Do you help them find that? And how do you do that? What's that process look like? Because I know for D2C,
Yeah, like I said,
sorry, I don't mean to, for D2C, for
no,
example,
go ahead.
very much like interviewing customers and things along those lines and then applying that. So I just wanted to see if that was similar B2B or if there's other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of it is research, initial research into the market, so competitive analysis and things like that. But a lot of these companies don't even have direct competition because they're really unique products, especially when you're in the tech or software space and you're kind of addressing a very specific problem. So in that process for go-to-market, we try to solidify what their solution is, what they're offering, and who they should be talking to. So those are the main components of that.
Okay, cool. So then in terms of, so that's kind of so does that kind of put together brand and marketing strategy into one piece? Is that what your process is doing? Or is it kind of splitting it into two separate entities kind of? Because
I
I know for
always
me,
say
for example, it's kind of a piece first and then you go into that. So what does
right,
that look like?
yeah. Yeah, I always say they talk to each other. I don't like to treat brand strategy and marketing separate, especially at that stage. They need to kind of be married to each other,
Right.
especially for growing brands. So, from a brand strategy perspective, and I know you've always talked about this too, you always talk about how brand isn't just a logo and colors and fonts and stuff. So, we tried to make that really clear in the beginning.
Right.
And like I said, when you're identifying your ideal customer profiles and you're solidifying your messaging about your solution, that really helps with brand strategy because it kind of dictates the way you talk to prospects and customers, and that's really the foundation of it. And I always say brand strategy in general is just the experience that customers have at every touch point,
That's great.
and then marketing itself is those touch points and what that looks like in the grand scale of the journey.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So like brand strategy is essentially like your story, and marketing is putting your
Right.
story out there. Um, and
Absolutely.
so, sorry about that. So in terms of your customers and things like that, I know you're building a brand that's customer facing and it's for them. So what's kind of your process of segmenting your audience? Is that important? And what value or what do you do with each segment?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, one of my biggest channels for getting prospects was LinkedIn. I know we've talked about this a little bit before, and just playing that long-term strategy of content. And it does really help when you're talking to someone specific, whether it's founders or CEOs, marketing leaders and whatnot, at companies who are in a certain industry or stage of growth. So that has been my long-standing strategy. But on top of that, I did recently start to segment more in like marketing activities, which has been nice. I started some outbound campaigns that I definitely did segment between industries, which was super helpful. When I work with B2B companies, it's mostly in the tech, software, AI, healthcare tech, fintech spaces.
Right.
So that's been super helpful because I've been able to talk directly to problems that each industry faces, and that definitely has been resonating more, I feel like.
I 100% agree. And so like when it comes to like, for example, like D2C segmentation, I mean, generally it's
Mhm.
like, you have your demographics, your psychographics. So like, what's their age, their income, things like that. Those are your demographics. And then psychographics are usually like your preferences and things like that. And
Mhm.
some mistakes I've noticed, at least with other, agencies, I don't know if you noticed the same, is just having either too broad or way too narrow segments is like a big problem I've seen. And kind of the thing
Right.
I've seen with that is if you have the wrong audience segments and the wrong target personas, then all of your messaging and brand efforts go towards the wrong people, and you end up attracting the wrong audience at the end of the day. So is that something you
Yeah,
noticed?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember we talked about that a little bit when we had a coffee chat.
Yeah.
But that definitely is an issue that I've seen. And I think that just goes back to like sometimes the way I'll put together messaging is one from customer feedback and what they say, how Newsest helps them address their specific
Right.
issues. And two, I'll look at my own inbox because people try to sell me solutions too.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll try to see like what made me open this email or what made me answer. And it's usually because they're being specific and it looks like they're actually trying to talk to me and not just sell to me
Exactly.
in general.
That's a great point. And so I know earlier you were talking a little bit about like a go-to-market plan. So
Mhm.
what does that look like? So once you have like your messaging and you have, your target personas and all these different pieces, what does it look like to put it all together? And how do you kind of implement and go to market initially?
Yeah, absolutely. So for actual go-to-market strategy, it depends again on the client and the industry, because we determine which channels we should be targeting and where their customers mostly hang out, so that we're able to really be specific on where we're spending our time and effort. So sometimes that looks like certain forums. Sometimes Reddit has helped depending on the industry because we've been able to talk directly to decision makers in the industry. So that's been something that has been a little bit newer. It's a little bit different than just saying like, oh, let's spend X amount on Google ads,
Right. Yeah.
and stuff like that. And then at that point too, we usually don't run any paid um, efforts yet. we
Mhm.
usually go mostly organic, and then we piece together sales also and give them the tools that they need between messaging and then competitive analysis and knowing who their ideal customers are. So those are parts of a working go-to-market strategy, and then kind of optimizing from there and seeing what is engaging to customers or what's driving more of like the open rates, scroll depth, and downloads, things like that.
So that's very, very similar to what I do. I think really the only difference between kind of the direct-to-consumer market and then B2B is I have definitely seen most B2B companies go organic initially. But with
Mm,
direct-to-consumer, I've seen essentially put aside ad budget for sure for your launch.
mm,
Most of the time, it's kind of like this big pop, this big launch that you have. Um, and when you're putting together your brand strategy for D2C, for example, it's usually split into a few different pieces. For example, you have like the product, which is like, do you have product market fit, like you were talking about earlier? You have like
mm,
media channels, which are like your different touch points. What's like your digital platform? So for example, like how are you collecting emails and things like that? How are you getting community and how are you shifting demand? And in order to, once you put all these different pieces together, you essentially have this ad budget put aside where you're going out and you're going on Instagram or wherever the case may be and spending quite a bit
mm.
to get your name out there. I think that's one of the biggest differences between the two. Um,
Right. Do you usually in your go-to-market strategy for D2C, do you find that your clients that you work with really try to emphasize on the paid side?
yeah, at least for what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they want to see big numbers, honestly, from
Hmm.
everything I've seen, especially after spending 6, 8 months working on a product and iterating and going back and forth, figuring out how this is going to work and doing this whole strategy piece. They want to get a sale pretty quickly compared to B2B, where it's usually a longer sales cycle. It's usually 3 months or so to gain trust, whereas D2C, it's a product and you can gain somebody's trust through a landing page and they can click buy now from there.
Hmm.
Um, so B2B organic is the way to go because you're taking 2, 3 months to build trust with somebody. Whereas with D2C, you want to be in somebody's face all the time and you want to show them that I'm the best solution, or I'm the best product in the market. Yeah,
Right. I always say that for B2B, it's hard to do ads because no one really wants to look at ads about clunky things like software or tech.
right.
Even if you have like the most optimized, streamlined solution or whatever, it doesn't really translate a
Yeah,
lot of the time because, like you said, it's a longer sales cycle, it'll be higher ticket. You need to build that trust. And part of that is all the moving parts that come with like sales who talks directly to them as well, and just
exactly.
their overall experience, not just with marketing and brand.
Mhm.
But that's definitely an issue that I'll have sometimes. Like it'll be a B2B software founder and they're like, oh, I set this much aside for ads. I'm like, but you don't have product market fit yet. So that'll be a big issue that we have. And I always try to encourage, I know not everyone wants to go and post on LinkedIn, but content strategy is really long game, even if it's like your personal brand and not for the company, because company
Right,
content doesn't always do that well compared
exactly.
to actual people. So that's something I do encourage, and people like to see you building in public. And
Right.
a lot of time, you can get product market fit
Yeah.
and direct feedback from building in public too.
Yeah. And your best advocates are your employees. So if or the people working with you,
Right.
working for you. So if you have them online too, just making content because they want to, and they end up talking about your brand or your company, that's the best advocate you can
Mhm.
get. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
absolutely.
100% be online, make content for your own personal brand, and then also be online in terms of your brand itself, in terms of your company. Um,
Mhm.
but I know we were talking about earlier, kind of building trust and things like that. And I know the best way to do that is to tell a compelling story. So in terms of when you're building a brand, how do you tell a compelling story for a company?
Yeah, so like I said, a lot of the a big part of like the brand strategy is knowing who you're talking to, and then also really accessing what their pain points are so you can talk about them. So instead of just talking about like benefits of or features of a software, no one really resonates or cares about things like that. But actually talking about pain points to decision makers or people in in a certain company who actually have experience daily with those types of issues and offering a solution on how to address them directly.
That's a great point. Yeah, because I know, I mean, emotion sells, right? So it's like, I like to
Mm-hmm.
say something of like, we buy based off emotion and then justify with logic. So for example, like
Mm-hmm.
D2C, like the whole idea is you're trying to like craft a narrative that your customers are focused or your customers are part of. So I know for B2B too, I mean, like I have my company's a B2B business and we have like this really short like paragraph that's essentially our customer story. And it's talking about the types of D2C brands that we work with in like a quick 2-3 sentence piece. Do you have anything similar? Do you use anything like that?
Yeah, we like to, especially when aligning with, because I'll work really close with like any incoming salespeople or business development. So that piece is really important because, like I said, it's really personalizing the experience for the customer. Like whenever a customer has any interaction with the brand, they should know that it's for them. That's why I talk about making your solution like a no-brainer for them, because it should feel like it's a no-brainer, the only solution that makes sense for them.
Right. And a big way to do that too is kind of like what you were talking about earlier with the content piece. For example, like being active on LinkedIn or just being present online. You build that trust over time, and it happens naturally. It's not like you're going in people's DMs or mass sending out emails to try to get people to trust you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of that too is like, for example, for a blog strategy, at least in B2B, when you're in something like software or tech, um, a lot of people will focus on top of funnel and they're like, oh, look at all this traffic. And I'm like, but you have to actually convert them and
Yeah.
they're not at that point yet. So sometimes you kind of have to sacrifice metrics like traffic in order to get more conversions. And a big part of that is being really specific and in your blog strategy because decision makers will go online and search up certain things
Yeah.
for like how do I address this issue or things like that and being actually top of mind comes with being specific about what their problem is.
Yeah. And do you think something like a blog or a newsletter is one of the best ways you can do that to bring traffic to your site, or do you think there's a better way to do that?
So that is definitely long
Yeah.
long game and like long-term strategy, but I do like blogs, but like I said, I'll really focus on the bottom of the funnel.
Mhm.
And I don't ever say like let's just do a blog and nothing else. It's definitely a working component in the overall strategy.
Yeah.
And newsletters are great too. But that's when you already have like brand recognition and people care about
Yeah, for
what you
sure.
have to say.
Yeah. And how can you get people to care about what you have to say? What is that? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's really putting yourself in front of them. So whether that's being like a personal brand and being in those places they hang out, whether it's forums or LinkedIn, and kind of giving them a personalized solution and making them kind of warm to you already instead of like cold outreach and things like that. Even just interacting um, with if they have their own content or their company
Yep.
content and pages and whatnot. So actually being visible to them in a way that's specific and not making it look like you're just trying to get something out of them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a big piece of that is also being specific on the platforms you use too. Because I mean, I've seen,
Mhm.
certain companies will just like go everywhere. So they'll be on like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. And it's
Twitter,
just sure, like, yeah, that you're all over the place, but it's not actually helping you at all because your target audience is only on Facebook, for example. So it's like you're wasting
right?
time and resources going to all these different platforms, making all this different content. It would be best to figure out what the best platform is that your audience is on and really grow on there and then transition to something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then in terms of like, um, where am I going with this? Just kind of like wait. So yeah, okay. So I guess I was trying to say like what drives the most business in terms of a B2B brand, but I don't know if that's really a good question to ask. So I kind of stopped myself halfway because I don't know if there's one
Hmm.
element of a brand that drives the most business, but what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think that could be answered in many different ways, and I think it could also be similar to D2C. But exposure is really important. That's why I feel like if you're not in the content game, you're kind of falling off. Like B2B marketing is really changing a lot. That's why you'll see a lot of similarities with D2C, because people are starting to make purchases similarly to
Yeah.
the way they'll just buy like a product.
Yeah.
So a lot of B2B marketing is starting to become like social selling and like community forums and word of mouth from other leaders in the space and stuff like that. So actually having that visibility and putting your content in the right places is super important. And I know content could be just like a buzzword or kind of
Yeah.
scary for people in this space, but sometimes it doesn't even have to be like a big drawn out like cornerstone blog or something like that that's like 3,500 words. Sometimes content is just like showing up consistently somewhere and giving a little bit of value and input in the industry daily. And now it's a little bit easier to automate, at least.
Absolutely.
Like you can sit there on a Sunday or a Monday and kind of crank out what it is you'd like to say
Yeah.
and kind of automate the process for you. So that's definitely, I think, a big part. And it's becoming very similar, like I said, to the D2C buying experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a big piece of that too is if you're struggling to figure out content ideas, especially in the beginning, I mean, just teach what you know. So for example, just go behind the scenes as to what you currently do. Break it down into steps, things like that, and share that. And that builds the trust we were talking about earlier, especially with that longer sales cycle. And I mean, D2C brands do the exact same thing. I mean, they're teaching about their product, teaching about trying to build like a lifestyle around it. And I
Right.
think for those kind of brands, the thing that drives the most growth is just an outstanding product. So having a really, really good product, because that again drives word of mouth, like you were saying, which is the best kind of
Mhm.
advocator. If you have your friends telling you you should buy this product, you're most probably going to buy the product over some email telling you or somebody online. So having that solid foundation of a product or a service that is definitely outstanding and is different than what's already out there will help you a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I feel like that's a big part that a lot of people don't realize. Like the product has to be good in the first place.
yeah,
And that kind of reminds me too, with the whole exposure piece and content and building. A lot of times, like you were saying before, like your best ambassadors and evangelists are your own team. And sometimes that's hard to do because sometimes you'll just be you and like contracted people, or like, especially if you're super lean, but that's why it's important to start early,
yeah,
even if it's just you as a CEO or founder,
mhm,
kind of communicating to people. Because one, you could really solidify who your target audience is, what your actual positioning and messaging should be for
yeah,
your product and whatnot. And it's like trial and error, and it really helps in the long term. So sometimes you'll build quietly for 8 to 10 months, and then you go public and you go to market with it, with your solution, and then you're completely speaking to the wrong people,
yeah, exactly.
and your messaging is totally off. So building in public definitely has so many benefits.
Absolutely. There's also, I mean, if you want to get your team on board, I mean, that's something I'm trying to do right now. But the way I'm looking at it is like, at least lead by example. Start off by doing it yourself,
Right.
and show people that you're committed to this and you will show up every day. And your team will realize, and especially when you start to build a little bit of traction and things like that, it's a good incentive. I mean, people want that too. People want some traction. People want others listening to them. So lead by example and start posting, and your team will eventually follow. So in
Absolutely.
terms of,
That's a really
in
good
terms
point.
of yeah, so in terms of like optimizing your marketing efforts and kind of scaling what works, because I saw that I was looking through your website too at one point. There was a part that was talking about kind of optimizing and scaling. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I always talk about how getting leads or keeping your customers looks different at every stage of growth, and it kind of just depends and differs where you're at. But optimizing and scaling is something that you should be looking at all of the time, basically, because when you're kind of on this trajectory of growth, your systems will start to break, or the way you're getting leads currently isn't going to keep working forever. And I'll talk about how things like on the paid side, algorithms and the platforms are always changing. So you kind of have to stay agile in that aspect. And then also, I'm a big data person. With all my clients, we have like 2 calls a week, and a big part of it is we talk about data and look at what we currently have live and in the works, and what it looks like is working. So we'll look at stats week over week and see where drop offs are. And some things are kind of environmental, like let's say there's holidays or something like that. But we'll really look at like who's kind of clicking into things more, or who looks like they're falling off, or who's not getting the message at all, and kind of optimize from there. So that either means segmenting more and we'll update our content, or that means changing our rollout strategy. Sometimes it's a lot of A/B testing.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes it's just the times that you'll post things,
Yeah.
um, or just certain pieces of copy that you have that isn't catching people to even open your email or your post and whatnot. So it's a
Yeah.
lot of testing for
Yeah.
sure when you're optimizing and scaling, and then looking at your metrics and seeing how you can improve from what customers are doing.
So, yeah, in terms of that, I mean, that's honestly something I've been struggling a little bit with. So when it comes to marketing, how do you know what's working? How do you know what's not working? Especially when you're smaller, because I know the numbers aren't very big. So it's like you're looking at, pretty small metrics. So how do you know what's doing well, what's not?
Right. So it's always important to have like your benchmark metrics when you roll out something new. And I'll always A/B test anything
Yeah.
basically that I roll out for clients, just so that we can compare and contrast and see um, what's doing better. Because at least you'll always have another option to go with. It gives
Right.
you a little bit of direction. But at the same time, it's like I said, you kind of have to be really agile about it, because it's something that you check frequently. So having those benchmark metrics really help. And then that's why segmenting and being specific about who you're speaking to and your messaging is important, because then that dictates what KPIs you're looking for.
Yeah.
So let's say you're at the top of the funnel, you're not going to be looking at looking for a lot of conversions. You should be looking for more traffic, more open rates, more
Yeah.
click through, and then things like scroll depth, just depending on which platform you're using.
Yeah.
And then when you're at the bottom of the funnel, for example, you look at different metrics that are more conversion oriented and whatnot.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, because my whole thing is about, I don't the whole marketing side of thing. I definitely need to learn a little bit more about. So is there anything in terms of marketing that you feel like most people don't get?
Um, I understand you, because I've always been the type of person that has always been like, I'm not like a good math person.
Okay.
And then I got into marketing. I was like, this is like a lot of math and data and whatnot. But when you kind of look at marketing from still a storytelling perspective, that helps a lot. Like I said, so um, knowing specifically who you're talking to, and then having the other piece of, these are the KPIs we're going to be looking for that are specific towards those people, and what the purpose of the campaign is. So having those two pieces together is really helpful for marketing, because a lot of times I work with a lot of CEOs and founders who are like, I know nothing about marketing.
Right.
And then people think like that's great, because you could just run with it and kind of do whatever. But then
Yeah.
at the same time, you have to make it make sense to
Right.
them.
Exactly.
And a lot of what brand strategy is like ideation and creativity and whatnot.
Yeah.
But when you piece together the marketing portion, um, you can tell the data and analytics in the story,
Right.
and that has been super helpful, and it feels less clunky than just reports and charts and
Exactly.
analytics. So
That makes sense. Yeah, because that's something I've noticed too, especially with the brand strategy piece, because essentially the clients we work with usually have some sort of marketing team, or we outsource a marketing team that goes and applies the strategy. But something we've been doing recently is tracking brand equity, and the way we do that is through essentially monthly or quarterly interviews. So we kind of have like a
mm,
focus group of customers that are their ideal customers, and we have these interviews, essentially seeing, are you guys aware of the brand in the way that we're hoping you are? Are you considering different things or using the brand in the way that we'd hoped? And then there's also different software you can use too. There's stuff like SEMrush, like QuantCast, stuff like that, which will go out and like essentially find out where you're being talked about online and synthesize everything for you in these reports, so you can see kind of where your brand awareness is at, which isn't necessarily marketing data, but yeah, similar idea.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful. Like I was saying before, I'll try to utilize a lot of customer feedback. So that's why it's really important for me I like to work closely with like any incoming salespeople or their product team if I can, because you get to dig into the user strategy, and then working with customer success or support also is super helpful because you can implement like a customer feedback and satisfaction kind of strategy with them and utilize that info to adjust your messaging and your strategy overall. So that's definitely super helpful.
Right. And in terms of like campaigns, right? So I know you talked about earlier, you have different marketing campaigns. So what is a marketing campaign for people who don't know? And then also, what are the main campaigns that you're looking to run?
Sure. So it depends on what your goals are. So a marketing campaign could be something like an email marketing campaign that's evergreen and segmented, or a marketing campaign could be you're on the paid side. It'll be your ad strategy, and you'll have three different ad sets, and they're all segmented. So it's just a group of your like marketing activities,
Right.
and they're targeted and their strategy behind it, and then you have your overall marketing campaigns that just work together, and that's your overall strategy. And then I'm blanking on your second question that you had that you
So
followed up with.
what campaigns do you initially run? So like when a brand comes to you and it's like, okay, we need to run this campaign XYZ.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times, I've been talking about like long-term strategy between content marketing and whatnot, but a lot of that will be just launching their initial content strategy, email marketing, and whatnot. So those will be little campaigns before moving on to being able to like evergreen your email
Right.
marketing efforts.
Yeah.
So sometimes that will be after reshuffling a lot of your messaging and whatnot. A campaign could just be your initial like go to market
Right.
strategy, and having those little bursts of I'll call them like attention getters and feelers for you, and that kind of will dictate the rest of your strategy. So it really just depends on the goals of your client, but getting those initial feelers will be like the first initiatives from a go to market campaign perspective.
And then does the segmentation piece that we were talking about earlier, like segmenting your audience, does that dictate the campaign that you use? Is it, audience focused? Like how do you decide kind of like what kind of content you're putting out and for who?
Yeah, I almost always like to segment. Um, just at least like if you're on a bigger platform, obviously you can't do it in a way where it's like email
Yeah.
or calling, like if you're in sales, but that the messaging part is really important. I don't like to have really vague messaging because let's say you have a bunch of different use cases and personas that you'd like to target, even if you're general, it's not going to resonate with any of them. So being specific is definitely helpful. And I even on LinkedIn or like blog posts and whatnot, I'll be specific.
Yeah.
And even for like a blog strategy, I'll try to break down between like this industry and these thought leaders and these decision makers, instead of having like very broad and vague um, content that doesn't really convert.
Right. Makes sense. So like, yeah, so in terms of that content piece, this is something I've been doing too. There's this brand I worked with a while ago, and we started off doing like this messaging framework for them, and it was okay. And it was because we didn't do any customer research for them. They didn't want to do that piece. So we just made this messaging framework, but with
Interesting.
no story attached to it, no anything. And so he tried it out, and like it was not working whatsoever. But then we put a story
Mhm.
behind it, and it was it's a shoe company, small, like they make like accessories for shoes. So it's like little
Okay.
smell ball things and stuff like that. right? So then we kind of like put this like small little story to all his content, and this is very small scale stuff, and just pretty much talked about how like just said more than the features and showed pictures of people using it and etc. And all of a sudden things started working. So kind of this whole story aspect when it comes to a marketing campaign, how do you kind of apply your brand strategy to this marketing piece? And I know like brand strategy is kind of like the whole like who, what, where, when, and why of your brand. So it's like, your target personas, your values, whatever. How do you infuse that into your campaigns?
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it. So, like the brand part, the way that ties into marketing is just the execution a lot of times, and the actual strategy behind how you're going to target the who and what and how. So, it, the way that you kind of marry the two is just between, like I said, being specific about what platforms that you use, and that kind of really helps with the storytelling piece, because when you're already kind of building on certain platforms, it becomes easier because you get feedback from your ideal customers, and you're able to kind of tailor the experience. And a lot of times you'll learn a lot about the industry that you're targeting,
Mhm.
from like sharing your perspective and then getting other people's perspective. Because, like you said, it is an emotional decision a
Yeah.
lot of times. So, kind of tying into that is important.
Yeah. And also it's okay to tweak your brand strategy too, based off of the data that you get.
Hmm.
That's something I've
Hmm.
seen too, is like we do these workshops in the beginning of our process to kind of get some clarity and direction. And I've gone through a whole process where I set up a brand strategy for somebody, and then it was like 8 months later, I came back to them and I said, hey, I was like checking in on a few clients, and it turns out like, things aren't going as we planned for your brand right now. I think we should get back together and update a few things. And so we got back together, and he was a little upset. He was saying, I didn't know that this is something that you update over time. Like I thought this was like a one and done deal. And I was like,
We
well,
wish.
I know exactly. And it is all based off of your customers and based off the people you serve. So if the people you serve change, or if they say something that you weren't expecting, or something like that, then you should change too, and you should adapt with that. Um,
Right.
so you're definitely right. The whole marketing piece brings that data in to be able to update the core brand strategy and pivot in a good way.
Yeah, and a lot of times you have to sort of become a subject um, matter expert, because industries are changing. So it'll be a lot of moving parts. It's between the way people change and the way they buy, like being agile, and like how B2B marketing is changing, or in the actual industries, and whatever pain points kind of arise from whatever's going on in that specific industry. Decision makers who have certain issues that kind of pop up, and kind of being attuned to that, instead of just staying the same, and keeping your strategy the
Right.
same, because it's supposed to grow with you. It's supposed to grow with your customers too.
Exactly. Yeah. And something we've said, or something that I've talked about with a few people too, is the idea of shifting demand um, in the market, and kind of getting people to want to work with you specifically because of you. So is there anything in terms of like B2B, is there anything B2B businesses can do to start to shift demand towards themselves?
Yeah, so a lot, what really comes to mind is when we're talking about getting your team on board. A lot of times I'll learn about solutions because employees have shared a lot about the company.
Yeah.
One company that comes to mind is Chili Piper. Like I didn't really know about Chili Piper until I saw a bunch of their evangelists kind of talk about it. So a lot of companies do a really good job at that, and that's a whole inbound system in and
Right.
of itself. So utilizing that leg, and also just being attuned to, like I said, what customers are facing in that point in time.
Right. I also feel like this is kind of where design plays one of the biggest roles, is kind of like shifting people's demand. I feel like, when you see a really, really amazing packaging next to just average packaging, you're going to pick up the really nice packaging. So it
Hmm.
kind of shifts your eye to go to the product that they want you to focus on. So really focusing on design here. So I feel like having a good design system, and having like good collateral design. So any print that you have, your website, things like that, feel like should all be on point and really consistent. And
Right.
then also the email campaign thing you were talking about earlier, I feel like is also a really big piece. Or just like different marketing campaigns in general that get you in front of your target audience more often are great ways to.
Yeah, I feel like email marketing, it's just been around for so long, so sometimes people will forget about it, but it's really great because I don't know about other people, but I definitely check my email like all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have a mix. I'll have things that are like B2B solutions and software people are trying to sell me, but then I also have a lot of D2C emails. And it's kind of nice to see like the experience as a customer
Yeah.
and seeing what kind of resonates with you because you can implement that for your clients and test different strategies between design and copy and whatnot. So that's super helpful.
Yeah, and that goes, like what you were saying earlier, like the whole idea of like kind of stepping into your audience's shoes and the social listening, and just kind of figuring out like why did I click this? Why did that make me, click read more and things like that. So yeah,
Mhm.
just take some time to really sit down and scroll and pretend your target audience and see what's making you do each action online and apply that into your own strategy.
Yeah, a big part of that in brand strategy and marketing, I feel like, is just being really curious and staying curious and kind of acting like you don't really know anything. So, how would you talk about your solution or position your messaging to someone who doesn't know you at all? Um, and kind of how do you relate to them? And that kind of is really helpful when in dictating your messaging.
And sometimes you have to get somebody like you to come in who doesn't know them at all to tell them how to do that, because I know, at least for me, I'm so close to my business that sometimes everything feels extremely clear to me and what I'm doing in
Right.
my process. But then I'll have somebody else come in to look at it and just, what do you think of this? And they'll look at it and be like, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me here at all. So it's like,
Mhm.
okay, I clearly have to make a few changes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point because I know we talk about customer feedback and having those touch points and it kind of changing your messaging and how we apply that kind of strategy for clients. But that was something I started to do for myself too for Newsest.
Yeah.
I started having because I have such regular checkpoints with clients, so getting their feedback on how they interact with Newsest, how it helps them as a solution was really helpful. I recently redid all my messaging
Yeah.
on all of my website copy. So things like that are super helpful because, like to your point, I was just really in my business. So I was like, this makes sense to me. But when you go to my website, at least before, it was kind of just like, okay, it's an agency that offers services, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
But that's not what um, I really offer to clients. So being able to be specific and keeping your ears open to that type of feedback is important.
Right. Yeah, and that's something I've been trying to do myself too. And interviewing your clients and seeing what they think of you initially is a good idea, actually. I don't know why I haven't thought about doing that for myself, but yeah, so I'll definitely try that out. But yeah, so thank you so much, by the way, for taking the time to do this. Um,
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited that I'm like one of the first five.
of course. Yeah, it was really cool to see kind of the similarities between the two, between B2B and D2C strategy. Also really like the fact that you kind of put them together and kind of have it all as one process, because they should be married to each other. That definitely doesn't make sense. Um, so for anyone watching, I hope that episode was insightful for you. Thank you again, Kirstie, for joining me. And I'll see everyone next week.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.